Good evening.
Vladimir Vladimirovich, hello, Prince. Now, first of all, well, the state visit to Kazakhstan is ending. You were met everywhere at the highest level. In the end, how do you assess the prospects for cooperation? Okay.
Kazakhstan, I have said this many times, not only is our ally a reliable partner, but it is very important that Kazakhstan is developing successfully under the leadership of President Tokayev Kasenkevich, demonstrating stable growth, very stable and reliable. The socio-political button in the country is stable, which is very important for planning work in the economic sphere. We have substantial investments amounting to $1 billion in the economy. Kazakhstan's trade turnover has reached 30 billion and continues to grow. Traditionally, the areas of our cooperation have developed. This is space and energy. This is already these days high technology. Now, on energy projects, it is possible to expand cooperation in the field of nuclear energy, since we are already working together.
Kazakhstan, the world's largest uranium producer.
We will actively participate in the fields market in Kazakhstan.
In the sphere. In the field of industry, we have good prospects, especially in the field of cooperation.
One of the problems was, and partly remains, the problem of settlements, but we have already converted over 80% of all settlements into national currencies. And this, of course, facilitates our work in the financial sphere. Well, among other things, our humanitarian ties at the universal human level are very good contact.
Kazakhstan is practically a Russian-speaking country. Well, you will feel it for yourself.
Unfortunately, there are always many people with their own opinions about what and how to do, and with their criticism of the ongoing processes in both Russian and Kazakh society, and not always that. This position is critical. It corresponds to the interests of states, including the Russian state. This is not always beneficial. In my opinion, we should do everything to strengthen our ties, but in no case should we take steps that would destroy our relations, let's say. In energy, we have traditional things here. Nevertheless, we have very large projects in the sphere of transportation of our energy resources in 3 directions through the territory of Kazakhstan.
And here, traditionally, a situation has arisen when in one of the regions of Kazakhstan there is not enough of the same natural gas, but in other territories it is beaten in excess. And we, the suppliers in Kazakhstan, join forces to receive something from Kazakhstan. With a sufficiently large territory of Kazakhstan itself, our large territories are more profitable than developing directly on our territory. So we are natural partners and allies. I assess that we have very good prospects for the future, and yesterday, in an informal atmosphere, we touched Jamil all evening with the President.
During dinner, we discussed these prospects, which I view as highly positive.
Good afternoon, Nikolai Russia. Alexei Golovko, did you say about Cheers, but in Kazakhstan, a referendum was held this October in which the overwhelming majority of citizens voted in favor of construction. As far as I know, the contractor has not yet been selected. Touching on this specific topic in your conversation with Mr. Tokayev, perhaps you somehow highlighted the virtues of Rosatom?
Thank you. Yes, of course. We paid quite a lot of attention to this during the negotiations yesterday, in a narrow and wide composition.
Kazakhstan, if it will carry out its projects in the field of nuclear energy, then of course, like any customer, has the right to choose the most suitable technological solutions for itself and
financial schemes. I think it is no coincidence that the Russian company Rosatom is the largest I will say this, the largest company of a kind in the world, including in terms of the number of nuclear power plants under construction abroad. What does this have to do with the fact that, as I have repeatedly said, we are not just building a power plant? We usually create an industry in the country that starts this type of activity. We are preparing the staff. We supply the necessary materials, take away the spent fuel, and so on and so forth. It contributes to the development of nuclear science. Indeed, and certainly. The President of Kazakhstan and our Kazakh colleagues are friends. Such activities are familiar to them. They are not starting from scratch. Repeating, we even have enterprises. They have a uranium mining enterprise to work in this area. They are perfectly aware of what they want, what they are willing to pay for it, and what they want to get. Therefore, we have such a very professional conversation if there is a need and desire among our partners, in this case in Kazakhstan. Apply something detailed. Solutions, including technological solutions of 3 parties. Inviting their experts to collaborate is also feasible, and Rosatom has extensive experience cooperating with international partners. This matter was addressed yesterday, though the final decision rests with the client. I believe that. Our cooperation with Kazakhstan in this area is very possible. But it would be really strange if Kazakhstan, which, as I said, has the largest uranium reserves in the world, did not use it, but only mined it and simply sent the raw materials for export. Thus, the leadership of Kazakhstan and primarily ourselves find it essential. Perhaps it is no coincidence that Rosatom operates in 20 countries or is building 20 facilities abroad. Modern technologies are very, very best in the world to ensure security. This is confirmed, and International Atomic Energy Organization, IAEA. Nikita.
Korsin TV company, NTV, Vladimir Vladimirovich, based on the results of today's summit, how would you assess the state of DKB? The organization is alive or dead. How do you feel about Armenia's absence?
As for the organization of DKB as such, of course, it is not just desirable, it is alive and developing, and all countries that actively participate in the work are interested in maintaining these contacts. Now and in the future, the situation in the world is complex. And it is complicated not only because of the events that are taking place in the Ukrainian theater, but perhaps in Asia. So everything is fine. What are the events on the borders of the Commonwealth countries with Afghanistan? Give us the opportunity to calm down and ignore anything. Complex processes are taking place in Afghanistan. We hope that we can build a relationship with Afghanistan. And we can't help but notice that the situation is stabilizing. We have relations with the current leadership of Afghanistan. They will develop. Recently, Secretary of the Russian Security Council, Shoigu, was in Afghanistan and only reported to me about the results. But the situation is still complex and requires our special attention, including from the outside, because this Dakaba deals not only with military issues, but also with the fight against organized crime, drug trafficking, and so on. So there is something to do in DKB, and the participating countries are interested in this. It's one now. As for according to Armenia's position, each country has the right to choose what it wants to do and how it wants to ensure its security. I think that the current situation between Armenia is most likely dictated by the internal political processes of Armenia itself. And of course, all this is connected with the consequences of the Karabakh crisis, but I want to emphasize that the Dakabis have nothing to do with it.
You see, I have already talked about this many times. Everything that happened has nothing to do with when, because there has been no external aggression against Armenia itself. The ODC is meant to defend member countries from outside threats. The events related to Karabakh have their own specifics because Armenia did not recognize Karabakh as an independent state and did not certainly include Karabakh in its perimeter. The state, which means that everything that happened in Karabakh, from a legal point of view, has no direct relationship with feeding, so it is necessary to claim that the DKP should have fought. It is rather peculiar in this enclave, wouldn't you agree? Truly, indeed, of course. However, despite this, it remains a very delicate matter. Observing from an external standpoint, it tends to seem straightforward. Evaluating situations from within is invariably more challenging. Once more, this is merely my personal viewpoint. Each member country of the organization must determine for itself what corresponds to its national interests. We will treat this with respect. Well, Armenia did not announce its withdrawal in any case, while it stated that it was taking a pause, but at the same time it supports all the documents that are adopted during our meeting today, today's session of negotiations, and draws our attention precisely to this. But if this is the case, then there is a possibility that I will return to the full format of work within this association. Let's observe. I'll say again, you once more. This means that the decision ultimately, of course, lies with the member country of the organization. Natasha?
Elena Nefedova from Izvestia newspaper. Vladimir Vladimirovich, today, during a compact meeting, you mentioned that Moscow reacted to the sustained deployment of American missiles against Russian territory simultaneously.
Twice. And following the response, we proceeded with hazelnut. Afterwards, it was utilized twice more in assaults on the Pskov region. All right. The damage is quite minimal, but still, the very fact of usage is significant, of course. We cannot help but pay attention to this, especially since the damage, that is.
At the same time, you stressed that Moscow is ready to respond to further escalation by the West.
I didn't just state we accomplished it tonight.
Yes, and in connection with this question. What is the meat of our questions now, a second inquiry? In this context, the issue is what measures is Russia prepared to employ regarding this? Do you believe there are risks? Are Western missiles continuing to be used in attacks on Russian territory currently?
Well, you must inquire with the Westerners responsible for that. Do they intend to continue doing this or not? If there are risks in strikes on Russian territory, I have also spoken about this many times. Of course there is, because it means the involvement of Western countries directly in an armed conflict. Well, in short, if their specialists lay down flight missions, transmit developed information to themselves, and coordinate strikes on objects on the territory of the Russian Federation. Of course there is, and I said that today means they got an answer. For approximately 200 years, our armed forces executed a retaliatory strike, and it was quite intricate today. 90 missiles was used in the strike. And 100 unmanned attack vehicles, that is, 17 various military, industrial, and support facilities on the territory of Ukraine were hit, which work for the armed forces and on. Industrial defense enterprises, and I will emphasize once again, I want to say once again now, of course, we will respond to such acts of aggression against the Russian Federation. How and when and with what weapons, it will depend on. Those objects of destruction that will be selected by the General Staff of the Ministry of Defense exactly for each object. A suitable weapon must be employed for these purposes. For instance, let's focus on the strike. A hypersonic missile for some insignificant, seemingly small target is meaningless because it is like watering sparrows from a cannon, but we will accept it for significant targets. The available funds, which I have mentioned, may also be allocated for military purposes, including the use of hazelnut. By facilities, by military industry facilities, or by decision-making centers.
And in Kyiv too.
Considering today's statements, the Kyiv authorities persist in attempting to strike our crucial targets, including St. Petersburg and Moscow.
Yes, please.
Good evening, Pavel Zarubin. The Russian TV channel has already told a lot about hazelnuts today, but the Western media write that there were explosives in the Oreshnik warhead, and if this is really the case, then what does this mean? And you can, maybe, something else. New details about hazelnut can be told there, and how much in general. As you said, we have secret developments of this kind on the menu. What will satisfy the client? Thank you.
You see, if I mentioned we're conducting test launches, then it indicates that the work is aimed at this, including improving this weapon, and it is. As for strike capabilities, I have already said that if you use it down several such systems in one strike, immediately use 234 complexes, then it will be comparable in force to the use of nuclear weapons. However, it is not a nuclear method since it is high precision and lacks nuclear equipment. Nuclear flares do not pollute the environment.
However, the force would be comparable. As for whether there was an explosive substance there or not, repeating times it is tested for this to understand what needs to be done additionally, and there is no big secret here. Here, experts will immediately understand what I am talking about.
When discussing improvements, it mostly refers to optimizing ranges.
And the combat part?
The greater the range, the smaller the warhead. The shorter the range, the more powerful the warhead, because the system can handle a larger payload. The useful weight in this case is all, and apparently different types of missiles are needed for purposes at different distances. In any case, the different equipment of this missile warhead is here.
You need to work, it's not a fee, it's not an easy job, it's probably also okay, additional, and so on.
Regarding this missile that we employed, the matching elements were utilized as the striking components. They are included too. I've already talked about the striking components. The account is quite powerful on powerful elements that heat up to a temperature of 4,000 degrees. Well, I don't know, you can look it up on the internet.
On the territory of victory, sleep is 6,000 degrees, comparable to the temperature on the surface of the sun. Here's a kinetic impact, a powerful impact, like a meteorite falling. We know in history how and what meteorites fell, where did they fall, and what were the consequences. This turned out to be enough to form entire lakes, true.
Here is Anton with a Russian meteorite. Why did he bring a renowned one here as well? And defeat means very serious. Everything that is in the center turns to ashes.
Decomposes into its constituent elements.
And the objects located at a depth of 34 or even more floors are affected.
Down. And not just floors, but this. Fortified constructions.
This delivers an immense impact, but of course more can be added.
And it will be even more powerful. The main thing is that
in principle, the sample is created successfully operates as intended by its creators and serves as an accurate, powerful weapon. Here's how to seek it overall, but after testing, we only discussed the hazelnut tree. We waited until we passed this test, and to be honest, they deemed it sufficient after seeing the results. Well, this is the case when fuss is inappropriate. TASS agency Veronika Romanenkova. The Western press already writes that some politicians and officials in the Soviet Union and Europe are proposing to return nuclear weapons to Kiev. In your opinion, how real is this development of events, or is it just some kind of escalation of a scarecrow? And if this does happen, if nuclear weapons are transferred to the Kiev regime, then what will Russia's actions be? Can preventive measures be taken? And is Ukraine's nuclear-free status still there? One of the non-negotiable conditions for settlement. Now think about it from a common sense perspective. If the nation we're currently confronting becomes a nuclear power, what actions should we take? In this scenario, we will accept and utilize everything. Let me stress that. This includes all weapons at Russia's disposal. None of us will permit this. Such declarations can only come from those who bear no responsibility. They have no responsibility on their shoulders for the fate of their country. Emir in general, and Trief officially, then you will transfer it. Then this would mean a violation of all the obligations assumed in the field of non-proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. Well, Ukraine itself will allow it. We will follow every step of what happens. This time was a very high-tech, industrially developed republic of the Soviet Union. Well, all is lost, or almost anything she could be proud of. Soviet Ukraine is lost, so today it is made almost from scratch. It will be nearly impossible for there to be something dirty, a so-called dirty bomb. Waste from the station could be collected, of course, but even then, the response will be thoroughly appropriate to the Russian Federation's threats. Yes, Andrei, please.
Andrei Kolesnikov from Kommersant newspaper. Vladimir Vladimirovich, I was wondering, when did you speak? Regarding possible strikes on decision-making centers, you did not specify which centers you meant, military or political. This is 1 and 2 after all. That's like the supreme commander, do you think? These strikes on the centers, they might also be hazelnut, as it appears you can't hit them with anything else.
This means that back in the Soviet era, there was a joke related to weather forecasts. And here's today's forecast. Anything is possible.
It's not about the balls, Junashev life.
Ah.
The dollar and euro on the stock market are breaking all records. Now they may have rolled back a little, but prices are rising. The ruble weakened against the tenge by even 80 kopecks last night. The population, at least the participation of the population, is solid. There is panic. Can you tell us the real amount of inflation, the real and not the nominal average salary in Russia? And when will we curb inflation, and will we curb it?
They dared to light it, that means. Well, first of all, everything that is called a central bank in the field of inflation is all real. Well, there is nothing invented about this. And in 2, it is easily verified. Real inflation is easily checked by independent centers that assess the state of the Russian economy. And the credit and financial sector, all that the central bank mentions now, is about how much an 8.5 inflation is. Some experts argue that with inflation at 8.5, having a key rate of 21% seems excessive. That's quite an inflated rate. However,
If it's stated that prices are increasing, we still need to consider whether this rate is indeed overpriced or not. There are alternative tools to combat inflation without raising the key rate. Indeed, the central bank has various instruments for regulating the banking sector. Regarding mandatory resources that banks must comply with themselves. Before loans are issued, this process is influenced by decisions, including those by the government, to boost lending to the population, and especially for mortgages, on social loans and so on. There are many other tools, but it is the specialists of the central bank, in accordance with the current law of the Russian Federation, that must make the final decision. We will see soon. As for the fluctuation of the ruble exchange rate, is this related? Not only with inflationary processes, it is also associated with payments to the budget. This has to do with oil prices. This is a lot of seasonal factors, therefore. In my humble opinion, generally speaking, the situation is under control, and for some reason, Oleg, as you said, there is absolutely no reason for panic. Well, both in our country and in neighboring countries, the processes are not easy, but they are under control.
Good evening, Vladimir Vladimirovich, Ekaterina Lazareva, Uraru Agency. You recently had a telephone conversation with German Chancellor Scholz. You have not been in contact for almost 2 years. And in general, it was a surprise to you that it was Scholz who was the first of the Western leaders to contact you, and what impressions did you have from this conversation? Thank you.
First of all, our contacts continue. How strange this would seem with many countries with which we have very complicated relations. Yes, I have not had direct contacts with the leaders of these countries, but I know that some of them also show a desire to resume these contacts and discuss current problems related to the events in Ukraine, both bilaterally and in the pan-European context. Yes, indeed, the Chancellor of the Federal Republic of Germany is assured that he was the first to interrupt this silence. There was nothing unexpected for them here either. We have been receiving signals about the Chancellor's desire to talk by phone for quite a long time. As you're aware, we are always open to such contacts. Neither I nor anyone else has ever refused and will not refuse such contacts in the future if they arise. Desires anyone has, please, we are open. As for the conversation with the Chancellor, it lasted quite a long time, a full hour. And this mainly pertained to the events occurring in Ukraine, yet there were also other concerns. There was absolutely nothing out of the ordinary here, nothing unexpected for either of us. He expressed his view, I stated mine, and we both adhered to our positions. On this matter, there were several issues linked to bilateral relations. Well, perhaps more in passing, but generally speaking, dialogue is possible in the future. Proceed, please.
Olga Matveva, radio station Mayak and Vesti, a large family from Naberezhny Chelny, are ready to name the child in honor of the rocket complex Oreshnik, and according to the head of the family, Vladimir Sukhov, his wife is now 4 months pregnant. They are waiting for a girl and are ready to call her Hazelnut. Please tell me if you have heard about this news, and if they decide to do so, would you be willing to potentially meet with them?
This is their personal family matter. Let me also consult with my grandparents. It will probably be like this. That would be even better than consulting me. As I'm engaged in my activities, they have an event approaching. I want to extend my best wishes to my future mother. All the very best wishes to the entire family in terms of making a choice. The naming of the child is an entirely personal family issue, and I won't even offer a comment on it. We wish you immense happiness and excellent health. Let's do what pleases us well, pretty please.
Good afternoon. Star TV channel, of course, Konstantin? Well, recently in many countries, neighboring Russia, elections of various levels have already been held or are only to be held in the near future. Here we can recall Georgia, the already mentioned Abkhazia, Romania, and Moldova.
The electoral process in many of these countries tends to be accompanied by widespread and frequent protests.
Politicians in favor of rapprochement with the West accuse their opponents of wanting to deviate from the chosen democratic path by abandoning democratic values, and Russia is accused of interfering in elections in these countries. On your part, you see signs of the opposite, Western interference in the electoral process in such countries. Do you see the threat of new orange revolutions for yourself personally? How do you explain the mood? Obviously, a significant part of voters in these countries want to restore the broken relations with Russia. Thank you.
I just want to tell you something and be sure of it. True or very close to the truth, despite numerous contacts with the countries of the former Soviet Union, including, say, Georgia, and contacts and influence probably, there is mutual from Russia to Georgia. Hence, on Russia at the official level, we do not interfere in the internal political process at all. We don't interfere, we simply don't. And as for Western intervention, it's hard for me to specify regarding our Western colleagues, as it's commonly said in quotes. And why is that? Because if we examine closely, we understand. How many participants in various non-governmental organizations on the payroll of foreign governments is located? And precisely how many individuals attend these rallies, counting their family members, their friends, and so on, then this picture turns out to be very similar. Realistic about it. Crowds are on the street, and the number of sheets of foreign states receiving money for political activity within these countries. This is what you look at it objectively. This is such semi-open information, so everything will immediately become clear who pays and orders the music, and they perform it in the squares. So there is this interference. But sometimes, even when the events in Georgia began, yes. To be honest, I looked at it all with surprise and observed it all. It astonishes me that we lack any rapport with the Georgian leadership entirely, yet I was genuinely impressed by their bravery and the strong character they demonstrated to uphold their stance. For now, I will refrain from assessing this perspective. Here. Well, to a large extent, similar processes are taking place in the other countries that you mentioned. Well, perhaps if such an answer is satisfactory, let's get 23 times. Well, yes, please, yes, well, please, okay.
Thank you very much. Hassan is also called R3 in Arabic. Mr. President, you have never stated your readiness for negotiations on Ukraine and the specific conditions involved. To start these negotiations after Hazelnut showed his might, your terms will be changed.
You know, maybe they just spoke inaccurately. I expressed the preconditions. I did not formulate them. I did not say that these are the prerequisites for starting negotiations. I was just talking about our terms of peace. In my opinion, these are essential conditions for enduring peace. Sustainably, they could be such, and they were set out in detail in my June speech at a meeting with the leadership of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation. We have nothing else to repeat. Weapons are enough, of course. I understand that we are all aware that the emergence of such a weapon as the hazelnut strengthens Russia's military position because it is, well, let's say it bluntly, it's not a nuclear weapon. The results of its use, power, especially if you already use several complexes in one shot. This is the same as the use of nuclear weapons. That means something, right?
That's true, but with the advent of new weapon systems, our attitude. The fundamental attitude as a settlement of the situation in Ukraine has not changed. We remain open to engaging in the negotiation process. For on, of course, these conditions that I have set out. The Foreign Ministry's speech in Moscow in June this year did not change anything.
Gleb Ivanov, Argumenty Effecti newspaper. Well, lately we have been talking a lot about high-precision Western weapons, about Bareshnik. But another type of weapon that has become very widespread during this period is drones. Recently, the Western media has been writing that VSOL, they will transfer a new chip that will allow the Ukrainian drone to bypass the Russian RAP. How serious of a threat is this data true? How to deal with this? And question two, we know that in Darnovoda, well, those people who control drones, they are taken out to a separate branch of troops. Should we do the same?
One, there are some new innovations in chips and drones. Another interesting technique involving drones is now feasible. The drone is currently being actively used by both sides. It's also in active use by the Ukrainian armed forces. Initially we led in drone usage, but now they are using many too. They began employing drones after us with innovations from Vlad. Controlled drones are countered by ground operations, so new tactics will appear. I'm confident of a swift response from our side. The exchange of information is incredibly fast and mutual. Unfortunately, this information is quickly enriched and used promptly. Whoever reacts faster gains the upper hand. He wins. Here, our servicemen, our guys, learned to react almost at lightning speed, and a lot of people with very good education came to the combat zone right on the spot. I look at reports when I receive, read, and when I listen to oral reports. Frankly, to be honest, I'm even surprised. I'm speaking frankly. In the war zone, risking themselves were people with very good education, with good training, engineering, and right on the spot. Miracles are performed for us, although drones today are one of the most important factors in the successful conduct of successful military operations, but they can transmit. Today I mentioned that a select team in DKB will bring fundamental changes. During the fighting, there is no on the battlefield. The Russian army is advancing. I have complete confidence almost along his entire line of contact. I think it will be gradually, we will take new positions as we do now. Thanks to the courage of our boys, I never get tired of repeating this, but it really is. Well, your colleagues from the war zone, the war correspondents say this very convincingly. They do. Nobody came up with anything. Yeah, please. And yes, I know that we have done this. We are also thinking about it. The organization of this work is a separate matter. It is important, I agree with you, it is important, because a specific result depends on the organization of this or that type of activity. Well, right now, I'm also thinking about this at the headquarters of the Ministry of Defense, and we have a modern Minister of Defense, a man who is well versed in all these areas, although in basic education he is primarily an economist. But nevertheless, he worked on unmanned aerial vehicles for me when he was still the first Deputy Prime Minister, so he is in the material together with professional military personnel. I think we are now working on this, on the organization of this work, and the question is really important. I agree, please.
Interfax Agency, hello, energy question. What was the topic of increasing oil pumping discussed during the state visit to Kazakhstan? Here in particular, Kazakh through the territory of Russia to Germany. If you are ready, well, no volumes of grip, if you can say 2, respectively pumping oil, but already Russian oil through the territory of Kazakhstan to China. These children...
Yes, we discussed everything, including the possibility of increasing the pumping of Kazakh oil through the pipeline to the port of Novorossiysk for subsequent shipment of Kazakh oil to international markets. Moreover, it's not just Kazakh oil. Numerous foreign companies are working there. Therefore, it can be said that even though the oil comes from Kazakhstan, it is still of international origin and nature. 1-2. There have been multiple discussions on the subject concerning the potential sale by Rosneft of its stake in NPZ Schwed in Germany so that Kazakhstan itself can supply the oil for refining. Delivering or supplying oil for refining this factory in Germany. You are aware anything is possible. The one thing we deem unacceptable is the government of the Federal Republic employing illegal methods against the Russian company Rosneft. Which looks like simply nationalization, seizure of our property, removal from management, and so on. But this is also a question. Negotiations, and Rosneft is ready for these negotiations as with the Germans. Regulators and their partners and any others, including from Kazakhstan. We also discussed the possibility of creating new routes for pumping our products and oil and gas to 3 countries, primarily to the People's Republic of China, including through or on the territory of Kazakhstan. These are very profitable and interesting, promising routes and promising projects. Of course, they will contribute to stabilization in the world economy and, of course, primarily in the Asia-Pacific region. Well, it will create additional opportunities for us to work in the markets. Well, everyone, we did finish a while ago, so let's move on, all right?
Thank you very much, Igor Piskanov, TV channel RT. Now, you mentioned Chancellor Scholz a little. I have a question about another chancellor. Chancellor Merkel recently released her memoirs, and they spent quite a lot of time there on your relationship. And let me tell you a story from around the year 2007 when she flew to Sochi and met your dog, Coney.
She met the dog.
Well, they met your dog, yes, and many of us remember that dog.
Melissa and the dog promised to eat the dog, and the police promised.
Many of us remember coming. Many of us remember this dog. She's super friendly. In general, many even stroked her. She really liked to walk freely, and the essence of everything was the same thing happened. And in general, it turned out that Angela Merkel is afraid of dogs, and she wrote that supposedly you specifically exploited her fear. Was there such a thing? Was it true, and such a slightly philosophical offshoot that happened in general? How did it happen? So there was a time when the Chancellor of Germany actually came to visit you, and you often communicated there in German. And now we are talking about the fact that we are, as it were, starting the same hazelnuts in that direction. Here's to unfold. Thank you very much.
First of all, regarding the dog topic, it means that there really was such a case. Mrs. Merkel came to visit us on a diplomatic trip. My dog sent a message to my horse. To be honest, I already informed Merkel that I was unaware she had a fear of dogs. If I had known, I surely would not have brought the dog. My intention was to foster a relaxed and pleasant environment. The atmosphere stemmed from that intention. In Europe and Germany, from my experience of living there for nearly 5 years, household pets are generally very well received. I mistakenly thought she would be pleased. It turned out I was wrong, and that's just how such things happen sometimes. As far as I remember, she said there that tons of dog bites them when they were children. Well, that's how such psychological trauma happens, and when I found out about it, I apologized to her. I said, Angel, I'm sorry, I didn't know about it. Here she is with persistence, awarded the best application of development in the book. I also wrote about this. To be honest, strange for me unexpectedly. Here we are, talking to you. All this will be in the media. I look for her once. I turn and say, Angela,
please forgive me. I didn't mean to cause you any heartache. On the contrary, I wanted to create a favorable atmosphere for our conversation. I apologize if you suddenly, sometime I understand that it is unlikely that you will suddenly go today. Under no circumstances will I do this. But if so, on serious issues, namely related to how relations with Europe and Western countries in general are developing. But you see, we went, even in essence, I think so, did not participate in this. But our generations of former leaders even went to the collapse of the Soviet car, including, it seems to me, in order to make Russia. Today we can say that we are part of the so-called civilized West, believing that now, and when these walls of ideological confrontation have collapsed, we will now be part of the civilized world. Nothing like that happened. It turns out, in addition to all this,
except everything related to ideology, there are also issues of a geopolitical nature, geopolitical interests. And we were immediately practically shown where our place is.
You know, there are corners, and in the corner, and this is the end. Separatist forces began to support us. Terrorist forces in the Caucasus began to rock Russia from within. What are the relics? Do you understand that they had a village? Yes, we handled it, went through it, which we didn't offer to build a relationship. I've talked about this many times. Now I don't want to waste that time going back to it. That's it.
Still no, there is no expansion over NATO to the east in 5 waves, or you could say 6.
She's all over our objections to all our concerns. Well, they didn't care, they just went their own way, and that's how things turned out, including with Europe. Yes, I know European leaders say, well, we were against it, I said it, I repeat. It's important again. We are against Ukraine being in NATO. Well, you know, we're against, and will be against voting from my experience. Why did you open NATO's doors to Ukraine in 2008 in Bucharest?
The answer is simple, but then the Americans put a lot of pressure on us. But those grandmother Yuriev, what if tomorrow they put even more pressure on you?
You will again completely agree and will finally sign the piece of paper related to the fact that Ukraine is the same.
It is a member of NATO, and its position with SHA has remained consistent up to that point. The United States said, good luck, now we will not accept it. You know why it won't happen right now, so Ukraine is not ready. She must go through the path of preparation for membership.
People will not now, when they bring it to a state of readiness, accept, and again it is necessary for these Europeans, and they will again agree. But what's happening now? Well, this is happening in front of the whole world. It just seems to me that Europe has been relegated to the background. It ceased to exist as an independent center, an independent political sovereign hub of world politics, adhering to the whims of the American administration. The Polish butterfly moves only one step at a time, even to its own detriment.
I sometimes get the impression that people of a scientific high level in the same Federal Republic, who are in high government positions, that they are performing some kind of task for the American Special Services, but they are not working in the interests of their own, in this case, the German people. How can any rational person agree with everything that is happening in that region? Energy, let's say, is on the market with SHH, and in some states it is 3 to 5 times cheaper than in Europe and in the same Germany. Well, of course. Entire enterprises, entire industries are closing down in Germany, moving to Germany, and doing purposefully. Americans are pragmatic. People can actually do the right thing in their own interests. Yeah, but these are, it seems that if we say, we will hang you, They will have one question here. Bring the rope yourself, or you will give it to us. Understand? That's all it means. Well, Volkswagen is closing. Yes, metallurgical plants are closing. Chemical plants are closing. Glass plants are closing. People are already thousands of hours in hundreds, because 1,000 are thrown out on the street and nothing. Silence. Just some kind of fuss in the current domestic political process. How can one engage in a dialogue with such partners? What topics are left to negotiate? Therefore, it is not our fault that our relationship with Europe has deteriorated so significantly. This is also a consequence of the internal state of the European Union. The establishment of European politics is strongly desired to continue. Will this ever pass? Both Russia and our European partners have significant interest in restoring relations with Europe as a whole and with individual states. They are no less, if not more, interested in this, maybe even more. But I think that such a natural interest in developing relations with Russia is natural for you. Interesting, for repeating the tautology of their own countries of peoples, he will still prevail. I hope we'll actually see how it turns out. Well, let's definitely conclude now, okay? Please.
Hello, RIA Novosti. If I may, I would like to return again to the topic of the DKB in accordance with the Collective Security Treaty in case of military aggression against any of the participating countries at its request. Other members of the organization shall immediately provide him with the necessary assistance. Whether Russia, in connection with long-range strikes by Western weapons on its territory, intends to turn to the DKB with such assistance, this can be discussed as today, or this point has been touched upon, and whether the participants of the DKB are ready to provide such assistance.
Assistance, with regard to the provision according to which any country participating in the CDB must provide assistance to another state subjected to aggression. Absolutely no one has any doubts. In fact, every country is ready to act within the framework of its commitments. Realistically, let's review the ongoing event from different perspectives. With the same attacks on Russian territory with American weapons, what can other parties of this organization do to provide assistance to the Russian Federation? Well, even unrealistic, but most likely, even under these conditions, we are able to provide them with the assistance we can, and we have sufficient resources and safety margin to support our allies if necessary. Sure, indeed, let's proceed accordingly.
Vladimir Kulagin directly depends on Vedomosti. This is how much the current level of escalation, which began with the Biden administration's permission to launch attacks on Russia with us, should and can affect the possibility of establishing contacts with the future Trump administration. In general, how important is the administration? How important will this factor be in building relationships, or maybe some other signals that make it difficult?
We don't know what Mr. Trump and Mr. Trump were talking about. The current president. At your meeting. We certainly don't know enough to comment on it. It's quite impossible. Well, perhaps different options if the current President Biden believes that by aggravating the situation, increasing the degree of confrontation, he is creating conditions for the future administration to easily get out of this situation. Because the newly elected president will say, but it's not me. These are the people there who are generally crazy. Have nothing to do with it. Let's talk. Of course, this is an option. What are the possible versions? The current administration wants to create additional difficulties for the future. That is also possible, but to what extent? To what extent, if I imagine the newly elected president, but he is still a smart and already quite experienced person, it seems to me that he will find a solution, especially after he has passed such a, let's not say very serious test. How?
the fight to regain the White House, admit me, well, I think you also have the most. It was not even surprising that absolutely uncivilized means of struggle, absolutely civilized, were used against Trump. Well, up to attempted murder and repeatedly. By the way, in my opinion, they are safe now.
Unfortunately, in history, yes, here, but what? In the history of the United States, there have been all sorts of different cases. So, well, I think that a person is already intelligent and already hopefully cautious. You understand this. But I was more and more struck that during the attacks on him in the course of the fight against him, not only he himself was subjected. There are humiliating, absurdly unreasonable procedures involved, endless judicial charges, and a host of other such injustices. They resort to attacking the family members of their adversaries.
Even the worst of bandits would refrain from harming our children. When criminal factions engage in conflict among themselves, women and children are typically spared. Men are left to fight one another. And these were touching, you know, but this is so disgusting that it once again emphasizes the entire decline of today's American political system nevertheless.
We acknowledge the strength of this great nation and are fully prepared to engage in dialogue with the United States, including with the future administration. Thank you very much, and farewell.